In part 1, we sketched out a peacock feather with pencil. Now we're ready to paint it with watercolor. Now that we've got our drawing done, we're ready for watercolor. Before I start painting on here, I'm just going to do a little bit of color mixing first. This is my palette of watercolors. I've also got some extra swatch paper over here to practice mixing some colors on. When we're painting with watercolor, we want to work from light to dark and build up layers. So when I start with painting, I look at my subject and see which colors I see and which light colors I see. I see, for light colors, kind of a yellowy green, and then also this light brown in here, and maybe also a light blue, kind of almost turquoisey green. So I have this example that I did earlier, and I started with maybe some light green and some light brown, and then came in and added different shades of green and brown, building up those layers, adding variety. Now I'll get my water and my paint and get ready to mix some colors. I'm going to start with this yellow. One thing that's nice to do when you're starting watercolor painting is just kind of get your colors a little bit wet so that they'll release more pigment as you mix them. I'm trying to wash my brush off in between wetting the colors just so that I can keep them a little bit more clean. All right, so let's make that yellow, light yellow green. So to do that, I'm going to use a bunch of this yellow and then just a little bit of this green. That's probably too much. See how strong that is compared to the yellow. Let's test that out. That looks pretty good. Can always make it darker later. The other color I want is sort of this light brown in here. I think I'm going to mix a little bit of this brown, which is kind of a sienna, with my yellow ochre. It's this color here. Again, we can add darker colors to it. And then for this kind of really bright blue, I remember I have this blue over here, and I'm quite happy with that right out of the palette. But I'm going to try and add a little bit more green to it and just see what I think. Yeah, that might work a little bit better. So I can always hold these colors up to here. Okay, so I have my drawing, I have some paints mixed, and I'm ready to start painting. I am going to start with this kind of light brown in here. And I'm gonna work the whole shape at once, so I fill this space all with this color. I want to fill in this space here with this blue color, but I want to let this dry first. So I'm going to start working on some of the greens that I have for these guys. So I'm just going to paint over my lines and start putting in this information. Right now I'm painting over top of my pencil lines, but there's also more extra fronds that I didn't put in with pencil, so I can add those in too. There's often a part of art that is a little bit monotonous, and I don't know, some people might think it's boring, but I also think it's very relaxing. So in those parts, like right now, we're just filling in these green pieces. I think it's nice to slow down and just kind of relax and do what you're doing with thought and intention instead of just rushing through it and getting it done as fast as possible. However, for the sake of this video, I will speed up my painting sometimes. Sometimes it helps me to turn my page upside down so I can get these lines. Plus also when you turn your painting upside down, you can look at it from a different angle and maybe see something you didn't notice otherwise. I'm just looking at my feather. There's definitely some places where it's a little bit denser in here that I can capture. And then this ring around here is also green, this light green. And the last thing I'm going to do on this first layer, actually there's two more things. One of the last things I'm going to do is paint this in. I'm going to paint the whole thing because I can always layer over the darker part in the middle. And the last thing I'm going to do actually is mix a little bit of a darker brown and paint in this shaft part of the feather. And I might bring some of that out onto this. Is good for now. It's a pretty saturated color. So this actually comes all the way up into here. Down to there, and then on the other side, it does the same thing. I just want to make sure I have, oops, that is not what I wanted. It's okay. If you make a mistake, you can just blot it up before it dries. Okay, I'm gonna let that dry and then come back with another layer, actually first. So now the first layer of watercolor is dry. I'm actually gonna use my eraser and erase some of the extra pencil lines that I have on here. And I'm not too worried about where they're stained on there because I'm gonna add more layers as we go. So the next thing I think I'm gonna do is work on some of these purple colors that I see. I'm gonna use this blue, which is more ultramarine and less green. The other blue is quite green. Okay, that's better. And in my feather, I'm seeing that there's a little bit of purple up in here and then also on this side of this ring. So I'm going to start on the inside. Put a little bit in and then just clean off my brush and soften up this edge. Sometimes the texture of the feather shows through and goes all the way in to the middle. So I'm going to add in a little bit of that information. All right, and then I'm also seeing it kind of out here. And again, it kind of gets pulled up into the parts of the feather, but in this case in the opposite direction. I also want to put in this darker color here so I can start building that up. So again, I'm going to mix a little bit more of my purple. To mix purple, I use blue and red, and I'm using this red, which is more of a crimson color, versus the more orangey red over here, and this blue, which is less green, to make a darker purple. Okay, and I'm just going to fill in that shape. I still have quite a bit of this green I mixed up earlier, and I'm just going to make it a little bit darker right now. Okay, and I'm going to add this in places where I want to add variety, or where this green gets a little bit darker. Remember how we talked about how the feathers are iridescent and the light changes as it hits them? By varying some of the greens and purples in the painting, it sort of captures that feeling of the light coming across the feather. Also, by building up some of these shadows, we get the texture of the feather and structure. Gonna add, I really love using violet or purple as a shadow color in my paintings, especially in where there's a lot of yellow, like this yellowy green that we have. So I'm just gonna add in some shadow information. Really paying attention to adding variety so that the whole thing doesn't feel flat, and to capture that iridescent feeling we get. Now I mixed a bright yellow-green to add some highlights back into the feather. So at this point, it's really a dance of building up layers, adding light and dark in different places, and then deciding where to stop. One last thing I'm going to do is just mix up a dark color. I like to use that alizarin crimson and this kind of cool green. Whoa. I think it makes a nice gray, dark color. And I'm going to use that to pick just some areas I want to get darker, like in here. And along this edge. A little bit along here. Actually gonna take a lighter version of it and bring some of that out into these. Alright, I feel like that, you know, there's some things I could have done differently, but for capturing a peacock feather, it does its job. Just gonna look one more time, see if there's anything else that stands out to me, and maybe add a little bit of purple in here. Yeah. I think that's fine. I can always come back and add more later. On this one that I did before, I came back with some colored pencil and added a little bit more texture, detail, and variation with that afterwards. So that's something you can do too. In the spring 2019, I did this project with middle school students at the Anvil City Science Academy in Nome. Here are some of the paintings they created. Thanks for painting with me today. I hope you are proud of what you made. I think it's important to recognize that everyone's is going to look a little bit different, and that's what makes them special.